Welcome back to Senior Savvy Cannabis. I'm Katherine Goldberg. Today, we're joined by Dr. John Streicher, who studies pain out of the University of Arizona. Dr. Streicher, thank you so much for being with us. What originally piqued your interest in pain specifically?
Yeah, great question. First of all, Catherine, thanks for having me. Really like being here, like being able to share what we're doing and spread the word a little bit about how beneficial some of these molecules can be, at least based on our research. And so pain's a tough topic. I don't have a particular personal story that got me into this. Like some people get into cancer research because their mom got cancer or something like that. It's not really like that with me. Um, Throughout my education, actually, when I earned my PhD, my research degree, I was studying heart failure, so it wasn't pain at all. When I was looking for opportunities after I completed my PhD research I could do, I was interested in learning more about what are called receptors. So these are the proteins in your body that get stimulated by drugs or by hormones and cause things to happen. And it so happened that a really interesting opportunity showed up in a lab that was studying opioid receptors. And so I joined that lab. I learned about opioids, and that's really what got me into pain. But it's a really I mean, it sounds a little grim in a way, but it's a really fascinating scientific topic, but also gives you a lot of opportunity to do research that's really going to help people. So chronic pain is a huge problem. Something like 20% of Americans have some form of chronic pain. So we're talking about, tens of millions of people. And for at least 10%, maybe more, that pain is essentially intractable. Like nothing really manages that, right? And so some people, they have sort of this view in their head, like opioids, that's the magic button, right? You take the opioid, everything's good. Like maybe you'll get addicted, but you won't have pain anymore. Well, unfortunately, it's not quite so simple. So opioids actually are ineffective for many. Aspirin's ineffective for many. Gabapentin is ineffective for many. Even non-pharmacological methods like, yoga or art therapy can be great for some people, but again, for others are just not effective. And so there's this great need. And then you combine that with all these other sort of social and political issues that go along with things like the opioid crisis and the overprescription, the actions by the pharma companies, the abuse and overdose crisis. So all of those things make this a really important topic for us to tackle. And my research on terpenes and on cannabinoids and cannabis generally is about trying to do that, about trying to get around this problem of opioids and find a better and more effective way to treat pain that's also not going to be addictive and not going to cause overdoses and all these other problems that we have to deal with and have hopefully to find a way to fix.
Why is pain such a difficult problem? It is it because it's so subjective? Does it come to our varying biology? Why is it so difficult? Out of all the problems
Yeah.
that we've really wrapped our heads around, pain seems to be the difficult one.
It is. It's not clear to us exactly why. Like it's not 100% clear. Like it's just some people,
Mhm.
or for any drug, some people, maybe even a lot of people, that drug just won't work. Whether that's opioids, gabapentin, or whatever, or maybe
Mhm.
it'll work a little bit or for a little while, but will either stop working or just was never that effective to begin with. As an example, gabapentin, also called Neurontin, maybe some have heard of it by that name. Um, Given for to treat what's called neuropathic pain, which is a really hard kind of pain to treat. That doesn't matter. The point is you get the drug. And for some people, about 15 to 20%, it works great. Like this is not an opioid. It doesn't cause the problems that opioids do. It has some side effects, but it works really effectively to manage pain. But of course, then what about the other 80 to 85%? So it doesn't really work at all. Why that is, it's still not clear. So we're still digging into that in the sciences. And there are many people that are not doing what I'm doing, like trying to find new drugs. They're basically trying to figure out, well, how can we make the drugs we have more effective? How can we better understand, psychosocial factors, the environmental and social determinants of health, and so on? Those could be contributing as well. But it's really not clear at this point why at least in some people, pain can be so intractable and so hard to treat.
I I think you said that perfectly. And it's something that our audience experiences. And, I get these emails every single day saying that people have been trying to figure out their pain management for decades. And
I do too.
sometimes all it does is take, a puff off a joint, a puff of a vape, and it helps. It helps. So can you tell me our audience a little bit about the mechanism behind or the series of events that go from uh, ingesting some cannabis to having a pain relieving effect?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm gonna separate two topics here a little bit
Please.
because although they frequently get confused, one's going to be cannabis, which I'll talk about first, and then the other's terpenes. Um,
Please. Yeah, can you break that down for us specifically?
Absolutely. So
Okay.
that they actually operate very differently, and we're still figuring out exactly how. So cannabis, what part of the confusion, of course, is that if you take the cannabis plant, like whether that's in a rolled up in a joint or you just look at the plant growing in the ground, that has terpenes in it.
Right.
So that's part of the confusion and part of why people mix up these topics in their head. But so cannabis. So you have cannabis. Maybe you take a THC extract. Maybe you have other types of cannabinoids that are showing up on the market now, like CBN, CBG, and so on, but a lot of letters. You smoke it, edible, whatever you do, that comes into your body. And the main way that acts is in the brain. And so you have these circuits that control pain and not just the transmission of the sensory information, like you stick your hand with a
Mm.
pin, there's that information gets transmitted up to your spinal cord. And so this is all sensory transmission. But then once it hits your brain, things get really complicated. So then you have like emotional processing and state of mind, and like the placebo effect for pain is really strong. So if you expect your pain to decrease, most of the time it will kind of decrease. And the opposite, the nocebo response. If you expect to hurt more, you're gonna hurt more. You're stressed. Sleep's bad. So all of these things, all of these emotional and cognitive things get added on to that sensory information, and then you experience that as pain. And this is then in all of that system that's going on in your brain. There is a lot of what's called cannabinoid receptor, and so there are different ones, but don't worry about that. So there's one protein in particular, cannabinoid receptor 1. Remember again, a receptor is a protein that responds to a drug or responds to a hormone to cause some changes to happen in your body. And so in those pain circuits, you've got a lot of cannabinoid receptor. And what that receptor does is it decreases the activity of those circuits. So you've got all this pain information rolling around in your brain. It sucks. No one likes that. The cannabinoid is going to reduce that neuronal activity. By the way, opioids work by a similar but different mechanism. So similar in the sense that it decreases that pain information that's coming into your brain. So that's the main way cannabinoids work. And now terpenes are different, right? So again, it gets confused because terpenes, there is at least some terpene in all plants, like, clove and lemon and cannabis and basil, like all of that has some terpene in them. There's a lot of these individual terpenes, at least 500, maybe thousands, depending on who you ask. And so if you take cannabis, there's going to be terpene in there. And so there's been interest in terpenes for decades now, or a couple decades at least, looking at the possible beneficial properties of these molecules, which are not cannabinoids,
Hmm.
and seeing what they might do. And people have found different things. So some have found that they decrease anxiety or that they're anti-inflammatory, even insecticide, which is probably the reason they evolved in plants to begin with.
Right.
And so you've got these molecules, people are finding these benefits, and that's where I jumped in. I don't want to take too much credit, right? Like everyone is contributing. I'm not in the kind of
You're
like
standing on the shoulders.
prime mover. Exactly. And so what we found then is we looked at cannabinoids, and in our second paper on this, we got interested. The second paper that we worked on, we said, well, what about chronic pain? And so we treated these mice in this case. We treated an animal model of chronic pain, a couple different kinds, 5 kinds now actually, with this chronic pain, with the terpene. And what we found is that it produced a lot of pain relief. That pain relief was equivalent to an opioid,
Oh my God.
or to be fair, a cannabinoid. So those all produced about the same level of pain relief. But the great advantage to the terpene is, unlike the opioids, no addictive properties, no euphoric properties, no constipation even, which is actually a miserable side effect of chronic opioid use, no nausea, like all that sort of stuff. And also, unlike the cannabinoid, no, psychoactive effects, no high, so none of that, but very effective pain relief. And then looking in the literature and other sources, we know that these are very safe molecules. So they are sold as food additives. Like you can just go and buy some terpene if you want to off the internet. It's in essential oils, right? So this stuff is kind of around us, and we're eating them in plants all the time. And so yeah, and so they're safe. They have what's called generally recognized as safe designation by the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. So these are safe things to eat. They're not going to get you high. You're not going to get addicted to them. But our work has suggested that they produce just as good of a pain relief as opioid or cannabinoid. But we found a different mechanism. Sorry, go ahead.
I know you're studying mice. What is the ingestion process of the terpenes? Did you put it like in their water and they lap it up? Is that
Right. So for these
does
studies,
digestion can
yeah,
it
so for these studies, we injected them because that would give us the most precise
brilliant.
and controllable way.
Duh.
But
Okay.
no one's going to do that in real life. So, well, at least not most of us. So that's part of the ongoing research that we're doing is looking for what you might call a translatable way to have this in humans. Human takes it by mouth in a gummy or something. Will that be effective? Will that relieve pain? So these are the questions that we're gearing up to tackle in clinical trials as an extension of our work. And then the terpenes. So I described this whole process of your brain. You've got the cannabinoid reducing that information. Well, we found that the terpenes work a bit differently. So they are not activating a cannabinoid receptor.
Okay.
They, at least in chronic pain,
Mhm.
in chronic pain, we found that they activated a different receptor called the adenosine A2A, which probably doesn't sound like anything or sounds like nonsense, but you know this receptor even if you don't think you do because it's the target of caffeine. So
Oh,
caffeine hits this receptor in your body.
interesting.
Does a different thing at that receptor than the terpene does, but that's the target. So like, oh, I know that one. And we all know that one. And then unlike the cannabinoid receptor in your brain, the at our hands, at least in our investigation, the primary action is down in your spinal cord. So again, you prick your hand with a pin or you get pain or whatever, that pain information travels to your spinal cord. Our work suggests that it's blocking that sensory information in the spinal cord through this different receptor before it makes its way up to your brain and you experience it. So
Wow.
different mechanism, and that probably explains why it's not getting you high and all these other things which opioids and cannabinoids do.
Um, People talk about the entourage effect. I've heard some people call it the ensemble effect. Um,
Yeah,
that it seems like if you're studying cannabinoids and terpenes in a lab, you want to isolate everything so you can actually study and measure. So,
exactly.
so it seems like it wouldn't really make sense to study the entourage effect in your type of lab because then you're working with a million data points. Is, is that
Yeah,
true?
that is a difficulty. That's
Okay.
something that's held back entourage studies. In our first paper on this, which was not on chronic pain, we did find that when you combined a terpene and a synthetic cannabinoid, in this case, it wasn't delta 9.
Mm.
Doesn't matter though, the details. So when we combined those two together, we did get a stronger effect.
Okay.
So that suggests that it could be plausible. Now, that said, the doses of terpene that we were giving in that study were way higher than you're ever going to experience, like
Mm.
smoking a joint or even taking a tincture or something like that. Like that level of terpene in there is going to be a couple percent,
Of
not the
course.
high level that our studies would suggest. And then another data point is
Mm.
that we actually looked at combination studies in our chronic pain models now. And so when we combined the terpene and the cannabinoid, they actually didn't get a better effect when we put those two together in the chronic pain relief, very
Yeah.
specific. But when we combined the terpene and the opioid, we did.
Oh,
So those, both of them separately, a moderate level, we combine them, now we get a high level of pain relief. And that has a few implications. First of all, that you could make a sort of combination therapy, right? So like maybe a terpene alone or an opioid alone is not what you need. Maybe you could do a lower amount of both, put them together, you get better pain relief, but you're not going to get as much constipation, addiction, and so on that come from the opioid. And then the other thing is like maybe our work because you have to have a high dose because maybe when that one study in chronic pain the opioid and the cannabinoid and terpene didn't combine, might say well maybe that suggests that the entourage isn't real. But in a sense, who cares? We can make whatever we want. Like
mm.
we're not stuck with what comes in a natural plant. Like we can make a tincture or a vape cartridge or whatever we want that's got exactly what's needed in there so these things can combine together and give us a better effect. And our work does suggest that you can combine, maybe definitely terpene and opioid, maybe terpene and cannabinoid to get a better effect than you would alone.
That's fascinating.
But
Um, so all the people who say terpenes don't mean anything, it's just bro science. Do you just roll your eyes at them? Like they
Well,
have no
they
clue.
do have a bit of a point in that, again, if you're smoking a joint that's got 1% or 2% of terpene in it, and furthermore, we don't have a good sense of what happens when you like light terpenes on fire,
They
like
probably
and then
degrade quite a bit, you think.
maybe we don't know, right? So like we haven't got to that point yet, and I haven't seen any other studies on that yet. So maybe they do. So maybe the bros are right about that one. That in that sort of that natural joint, maybe the terpene's not doing much. But it's also clear that terpenes themselves are not inert and they are beneficial. And we could be combining them in interesting ways in like a oral preparation or a vape cartridge or whatever to potentially enhance effects that we want, like pain relief.
That's incredible. Um, Brilliant. I'm just looking to see if I have any other questions for you. When you're working with animal models, how
Mhm.
exactly are you measuring pain that is partially at least a subjective experience?
Yeah, yeah, great
Just
question.
curious. Yeah,
So, yeah, yeah, absolutely. So obviously we can't ask them, which is still sort of the primary way that we do this as human beings. We just, give me the 1 to 10.
right.
Like people have been trying for a long time to find a, quote unquote objective method to measure pain in people. We haven't really found it yet. So, 1 to 10, how you feeling? That tends to be what we do with humans. Obviously, that doesn't work with mice or any other animal. So we do a few things, and I broadly categorize them in two groups.
Okay.
One you might call evoked pain. And so, you can imagine they're in a neuropathic pain state that it doesn't feel great to be touched. Like I don't feel really good right now. And if I came along and I started poking you in the head with a filament, you're like, hey, or poking you in the hand with a filament, you're like, hey, what are you doing? And so we can do that kind of that evoked stimulus. Like we're poking them with a little filament, and they're like, hey, that bothers me. They
Hmm.
withdraw. And then you can just measure like, how much force does it take to get them to withdraw their paw? When they're in pain, it takes very little force.
Hmm.
When they're not in pain, it takes a lot of force before they
Interesting.
withdraw. And then if you give them a pain reliever, like a terpene, now it
Hmm.
takes more force for them to say, hey, quit it. That bothers me. So that's one style of pain. And that is easy to measure,
Hmm.
right? So we poke, we measure what happens, and it's pretty easy to do that. But maybe that's not the most like important kind of response that we care about, right? Because there are plenty of circumstances in human beings where the what you might call the sensory threshold, the pokeability of their
Hmm.
skin or whatever, that doesn't really change. But you can take a medication which still enables them to, go to the grocery store and get dressed and go down the stairs and do the things that you need to do on a daily basis. That's the pain that we care about, functional pain, whatever you want to call it, right? Quality of life stuff. That's what we care about. And the reflex withdrawal
Hmm.
and that style of thing, like going about your day, not necessarily the same thing. We know, in fact, they can be different. And so the other group of pain models, which are newer and more tricky to do, but maybe more promising and rewarding, are what you might call pain suppressed behaviors. And so, what's the mouse's equivalent of going to the grocery store, putting on their clothes? It's moving, it's eating, it's socializing with their cage mates, it's running on a running wheel, it's a burrowing. They love to burrow. You give them a little thing full of material, they'll like burrow it out. They love to do that. And when they're in pain, they don't do those things, right? So
Interesting.
they don't move as much, they don't eat as much, they don't socialize as much, groom as much, burrow, run on the wheel. All of that gets suppressed.
Hmm.
And then again, you give them a pain reliever. Now those activities come back. And then that has some advantages. Maybe it's more relevant to the kind of pain I talked about that we care about as human beings, and it might be more naturalistic than poking and prodding them and seeing how they respond.
Exactly. It really does come down to quality of life. Can you get out of bed? Can you get something to eat and go about your day and, be part of a community in whatever way
Yeah,
that means for
absolutely.
you? Um, has has pain research evolved a lot over the past 20 or 30 years? Are we like, and where do you see like the next chapter? Um, what do you think that might look like?
Yeah, interesting question. Now I got to really put on my thinking cap for this one. So yeah, I've in some ways it's evolved a lot. So our understanding has increased tremendously. Like our knowledge of what happens. So we can trace the pain signal more or less pretty exactly from like poking your hand or pricking yourself with a pin. We know how that's sensed. We know how those neurons get turned on. We know how that signal is translated. We know at least some of the circuitry, not all, in the spinal cord that gets transmitted up to the brain. Things get a lot trickier once they get up here. All that social, emotional, and cognitive stuff, that's much harder to study, but we kind of at least know the areas that are regulating that. Like we can see the different parts of your brain light up when you're in
Mm,
pain. And so we kind of have we know the molecules, like we know a lot about how that process occurs. But in another sense, we're still using most of the same kind of drugs and methods to treat pain that we had, 40 years ago, maybe more. Morphine is like more than 100 years old, well, really thousands of years old, but you get my point. So like our ability to treat pain has not evolved to the same extent that our knowledge has.
Hmm.
And you're like, okay, why is that? You know so much more, right? You should be able to do something about it. Well, again, pain's a hard thing to treat. And we come up with these new medications in the lab and we then test them in clinic in people, and most of them fail. Most of them don't translate. They either, they don't work well enough, or maybe the side effects. Now, that said, there are some new ones out there. So, like recently, there was no, these names are so complex. Sutragine or something. It's got a lot of S's, T's, and Z's in it.
Okay.
A new drug that was just approved for that blocks a certain ion channel in your body that conducts the pain signal. Like that was just approved, new
Ah,
type of medication. Maybe
interesting.
some of these will be more effective, but it kind of remains a hard problem. And so, in that sense, our like ability to really treat pain has not evolved to the same extent. Although that I'll give a little shout out here. If you are a patient and you're in pain and you would like a physician to treat pain, I cannot recommend enough a dedicated pain clinician, like someone that comes from something like a chronic pain clinic or pain lab, pain specialist, something like those words, right? So these are people that are like really well trained in pain and its management, and they can really help you out. As an example, a friend of mine had this like I guess you might call it like stone bruise style pain on the bottom of her foot. And I was like, and I'm an idiot. I was like, oh, that sounds like, diabetes neuropathy or something. Well, go see this pain specialist. I know he's really going to help you. And like it ended up being like a muscle problem. And like she like, okay, do these stretches. And then she did, and then now her pain is gone. Like no more pain, no more chronic pain that was like so debilitating, right? So of course,
Wow.
not everyone's gonna have that experience, but the pain specialists can do an amazing job, even without a lot of additional tools that we haven't provided them over the past decades. Um, and then lastly, in terms of evolution, there is some evolution in terms of how we as scientists are investigating pain. And like so there are some of those new methods, like I mentioned,
Mm.
the quality of life stuff, like burrowing or wheel running, like trying to get better ways to measure pain in the lab so that we can hopefully translate it better to human beings. And also, I'm happy to say a different mindset or a different investigation into structural iniquities in science that have held back research. Greatest example being a lack of investigation into female pain and female, specific pain
Everything. Yeah.
mechanisms for decades until relatively recently. And so now that is essentially commonplace to do these studies in both males and females. And so, there's some good things that have changed in good ways, but overall, it's still a really hard problem, which is part of what motivates me to get out there and try to make it happen.
Amazing. Thank you so much, John. Just you're absolutely fabulous. Thank you for all the work you're doing and the scientific rigor that you bring to it. It's really remarkable. I hope everyone listening enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. And just know that you're not alone. You're in good company with like 20% of the population living in chronic pain, which is unacceptable, but is reality. And that's why we're having these conversations to try to get that number down. So thank you so
Absolutely.
much, John. I really appreciate it.
Could I just take another 1 to 2 minutes here?
Please, please.
All right, so two things. First of all, like again, I'm standing on the shoulders of giants, and that includes the people in my lab that do the physical work on a daily basis. I mostly sit in this office and write. That's mostly my job. So I really want to acknowledge Justin Levine, Abigail Schwartz, and now Jerry Carr, who've sort of been the leaders in this terpene research in my lab that have really put in the grunt work. Of course, there's others too, but they're the main ones that have really put in the grunt work and really made these projects happen and have pushed this knowledge forward. They're the ones who actually like did the
Did the
work.
science.
Exactly. And then I wrote and told them good job and helped them get it published. And so that's one thing. And then the other thing is I did mention that you can buy terpenes online. Like you can
Right.
just buy them, which is true. And if you want to try this, there's no particular reason that you can't or shouldn't. But you should still be careful because this space is very unregulated. So this is counts as a supplement, and I don't want to get into minutia of FDA regulations, but they are mostly unregulated by the Food and Drug Administration. And so, depending on the company, maybe they don't have what they say they have in there. Maybe they don't even have anything at all of what they say in there, which has happened before, or, different concentration. Maybe they don't do a good job of managing their quality. And as far as I'm aware, only one company that I'm aware of actually tries to create a terpene product for pain.
Oh,
Most of the others are attached to the cannabis industry in some way, not for pain, just
can
for
you share
like,
that with us?
you know, yeah, I can. So they are Napreva, Napreva. You go to
We'll link to it.
napreva.com.
Okay.
And so, full disclosure, I work with them.
Nice.
So there's a reason that probably that they're the only company in the country that I'm aware of making a terpene product for pain. So I help them design and test the products.
Wow.
And
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 how
if you
does
do
one
buy
take
from
it?
them,
Is it a tincture?
yeah, it is. So
Just
if just to finish, if you do buy from them, you will benefit me. So full disclosure, but I stand behind it, and I'm working with them as an extension of my own work. We're trying to get our product into clinical trials to test it, do all the good stuff that we're supposed to do, like very strict testing. And then yes, it is a tincture 1 ml dropper, which is kind of very familiar to most people. If you've bought a cannabis tincture or a CBD tincture, it looks pretty much the same, at least in terms of like that form factor, and you take it mostly the same way.
brilliant. Okay. Well, send me a link to it and then we will put it in the description and then we'll do a blog post about it. Um,
Absolutely.
but love it.
Appreciate
It's
that.
taking it out of the lab into people's hands. So cool.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, John.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too.
Bye bye.
Awesome. Thank you